Hello? Alright, hopefully my mic is being captured. Okay, yo, something, KallaTheYapper, and I'm back with another video. And today's reaction is going to be a Genshin Theory reaction. My first ever Genshin Theory reaction. Now, the content creator I'm going to be watching is Ashikai. Now, as you see, I'm already subbed. I've been subbed to her channel since, what was it? When did she first popped up on the scene? Like 2022? 2021? I can't remember. But that's when time I started watching her theory videos, and I've been watching her theory videos ever since. So this is my first time reacting to one of her theory videos. So yeah, let's get it. Like, sub, all that good stuff. Now let's begin the reaction.
Since our next destination is Nodcry and the people there worship a moon goddess, I definitely expected our first Nodcry character to at least give us a little bit of moon lore alongside their appearance. And Enefa definitely met that expectation, but what I was not expecting was all of the vision lore that came with this round of lunar intel. But it does make sense because we now know that visions originally came from the moons. In light of this revelation, I think we can safely assume that we'll be learning a lot more about visions in this upcoming patch cycle. So in preparation for this inevitable lore dump, I thought now would be a great time to go over all of the information we currently have about visions, revisit some old theories about them, and introduce a couple of new ones. And just as an FYI before we begin, if you have not played the Nodcry Interlude Archon quest, read Enefa's character stories, or her weapon lore, do at least one of those things before watching this, or proceed at your own risk. All other spoiler warnings will be in the description box alongside timestamps, citations, attributions, and links to theories that I'm going to reference in this video, so make sure to check those out. And with that, we are ready to begin, so let's kick things off by going over everything that we know about visions. Or perhaps I should call them by their original name, moon wheels.
Before she even gets into it, I need to say this. Back in version 5.3, at the end of the Archon quest, we were talking to Mavwika about certain information. The thing about the whole, like, the moon having, like, being like, what did they call it? What did Mavwika call it? Like, dragon relic fragments, whatever the fuck F she called it, right? And I was like, in that moment, I hopped on VC while I was streaming here on YouTube with the homie, and I was like, there's something interesting about why she's referring, there's something interesting about this whole moon thing. Because the way she's talking about it, and she's labeled the moon, these moon fragments, as ancient dragon relics, right? So my thought was, okay, so they're ancient dragon relics. So did the moon sisters, did they exist at the same time as the dragons, or did the moon sisters exist after the dragons? So when I played the 5.8 Archon quest, and that line was dropped by that AI dragon sovereign about the moon wheel, and on top of that, about how the three moon goddesses had betrayed the dragons, I was like, holy ish. My theory was correct. Granted, my theory was a little more detailed. It wasn't just about, okay, did they come first or did they come after? I also had this theory attached to it, which was, or this bit of detail attached to it, which was this. Did the Moon Sisters bend the knee to the usurper when they arrived because they couldn't match their power? Or B, they willingly bent the knee to the usurper for whatever reason that the usurper gave to them for them to align themselves with the usurper, right? And I have the sneaky suspicion that the shades were the Moon Sisters. So my theory was essentially confirmed. My bad for the yap session before we even started the damn video. I just wanted to say that. Anyway, let's continue.
Up until this point, we've been told that visions, also known as the eyes of God, are crystallized manifestations of a person's will or ambition combined with a fragment of an Archon's elemental authority. Not regional authority, but elemental authority. And the combination of these two things grants the wielder some level of control over elemental energy. This granting of elemental authority via visions appears to be involuntary, though, as Archons don't actually have any control over who gets a fragment of their authority. Nor do they know why a vision is being granted in the first place. Now, in the past, Venti has described visions as external organs, implying that they are quite literally a functional part of a person's body. This could be why separating a person from their vision can cause the wielder, also known as an allogene, to experience a massive shift in their personality. A part of their body has literally gone missing. Now,
This is true. This is everything we've experienced throughout the entire game up till now related to this information.
Conventional wisdom tells us that visions can only be controlled by their respective allogene. That is to say, someone like Noelle can't pick up Jean's vision and use it effectively, or at all. This is partly why when an allogene dies, their vision goes dark and defaults to a clear white crystal that's known as a masterless vision. All that said, it is possible to reactivate a masterless vision, but it's a pretty rare phenomenon and the requirements to do so are unknown. Now, someone is definitely going to point out that Kazuha activated his friend's vision and his friend is dead, and so at that moment he was actually using 2 visions, but that is an anomaly. What it does show us, though, is that it is possible for an allogene to activate a masterless vision, and that's the only known way to use 2 visions at once.
Oh my goodness, I just had the craziest realization. What if, in Nod Cry, the traveler obtains ambition? Right? Because back in Inazuma, when we talked to Yamiko at the end of the Archon quest, right? She was like, yo, Traveler, you don't have an ambition of your own, which is probably the reason why you don't even have a vision. Right? You can control elemental power by yourself. Yeah, you can do that. But you don't have a vision. And it's probably because you just don't have an ambition. So, what if now is the time for the Traveler to obtain a vision that will link him to this world? Because he already has an ancient name that links him to Natlan, and subsequently its ley line system, and by extension, I would assume the grander ley line system that is connected to Irminsul, right? So he already has that going for him. Now he just needs a vision. So what if we go to Nod Cry, and what if whatever moon sister gazes upon whatever moon sister that is still alive, right, gazes upon the traveler and like, yo, I'm gonna grant you my power. I'm gonna let you handle this from now on, type ish. And then boom, the traveler gets a vision. Could you imagine? That'd be so freaking crazy, right? Anyway, looking to you.
Like, we've never seen an allogene swap visions with somebody else. Yet. Also on our list of things that are presumably impossible is destroying a vision, or at least...
Oh, hold up. Another thing I need to say too. It's kind of crazy when you think about it in retrospect about, visions being described by that AI Dragon Sovereign as a moon wheel. Because when you look at an empty vision, it looks like it's in the shape of a moon. A clear, full moon being held together by this harness that is surrounded by, right? Kind of crazy, right? This entire time we've been staring at a pale moon orb when it's no element filled it that is filling it until it gets filled by an elemental power. It's kind of crazy, right? When you think about it retrospectively.
At least it's never happened in recorded history. Now, this was basically everything we knew about visions up until the release of Fontaine. Although we were able to correctly speculate about some other things about visions, like how visions are tied to a person's fate. We were able to confirm these theories during Fontaine, thanks to Nouvelette's character stories, which explicitly confirmed that visions were indeed tied to fate itself, which was also tied to the stars that made up the constellations of the false sky. The lore in Nouvelette's character stories was the last bit of information we got about visions until Anefa arrived and activated her moon wheel, which is apparently a proto-vision, like a precursor to the modern visions. Now, although there are slight differences between a moon wheel and a vision, they're effectively the same thing. So we can reasonably say that visions are moon wheels and moon wheels are visions.
Wait. It's a prototype. Huh? Where'd that come from? They didn't describe it as a prototype in the quest, unless it's like in her character information and in her weapon description. If it's in those two places where it's described as such, I didn't know that.
And this is probably my favorite lore drop of all time, because not only does this confirm some old theories about the true nature of visions, which we're definitely going to talk about in a little bit, but it also resolves some of ancient Tevat's greatest historical mysteries. And some of you are going to be very confused as to why I say that. But the truth is that the history of visions can be found in the ancient history of Tevat. So if we want to understand everything there is to know about visions and how they work and where they came from and all that kind of stuff, we need to understand Tevat's history. And we need...
Yeah, the biggest confusing thing about Genshin in terms of its lore, it's not like it's confusing in a bad way, but confusing in a good way, which is we don't even know the exact timeline of this world, right? Genshin Impact's world, we do not know the exact timeline at all. We don't know if it's been 10,000 years. We don't know if it's been 300,000 years, and so on. We just don't know how long it's been since the usurper arrived and did their thing, or since like the dragon race existed before the usurper came. Right? We don't know how long this planet's been around and its primordial species have been around before the usurper and all that other shit. You get the point I'm making.
We need to start at the very, very beginning. When the planet of Teyvat first appeared, a dragon was born alongside it. That dragon was Nibelung. Now, mythologically speaking, dragons are manifestations of nature, so let's consider Nibelung to be the original god that governs over the natural order, and all of the life forms that appear on his planet to be subservient to the laws of nature that he governs.
Yeah.
It's a reasonable assumption, and it fits with what we know. So Nibelung loved all life on his planet, the most powerful of which were the 7 dragon sovereigns who each held dominion over some aspect of nature. Nuvalet, for example, regulated the primordial sea from which all life was born, which made him kind of like the original god of life, while Xuequatl played guardian to phlogiston, a raw form of programmable matter capable of storing pure information. One day, a disembodied space traveler known only as the Voyager stumbled upon Teyvat and was so impressed by this world's civilization and the will of the dragon that governed it.
Hold on, let me pause real quick. For those who don't know where she's getting this lore from about this point in history related to Nibelung and like this entity called the Voyager, it is literally in one of the most recent artifact sets that came out, and it's the one that belongs to Skirk in particular. If you go to the archive for the artifacts, you can read the in-depth explanation of the lore behind it by clicking a button, and it's going to give you the whole paragraph for each and every artifact set. Well, for each and every artifact of the entire artifact set as a whole, and you can just read each and every passage. That's where she got it from. I didn't even know when Genshin added this function to the game. This could have been some years back, but like that was my first time using the function.
Governed it, that she decided to do something she never does and intervened. She had witnessed the destruction of countless worlds during her millennia floating through the cosmos, and she didn't want to see this one meet the same fate. So she met with Nibelung and warned him that Teyvat was destined for ruin. But because she didn't want to see him die, she asked him to abandon Teyvat and travel the cosmos with her. But he refused, claiming that the life found on his little planet was the very meaning of the universe itself, and he would not abandon his people. So the Voyager left him be and promised to return one day to check in on him. But her words haunted Nibelung. He didn't want his people to fall to ruin, as the Voyager predicted, so it seems as though he decided to initiate a space program, reasoning that if the world was destined for destruction, then he could at least take his people with him somewhere else.
Wait a minute. Okay. I didn't know about this. I'm going to assume that she's attaching this because of the world quest that was released not too long ago with the little dragon buddy that we had. It was the final world quest that pieced together all those chain world quests in that land, right? Where at the end we find out that this whole Ochkanatland's quote unquote ship that's hovering above Ochkanatland all the way up in the sky. We find out that that's supposed to be like some tether to the moon. That ship is supposed to be turned facing straight up, but it's facing sideways, so it's in the wrong position, right? Because of Ochkan's intervening, right? So that was supposed to be a tether to the moon. Granted, I don't know what's on the moon. For all we know, the moon could have like some type of space station or some miniature city on it. Shoot, I'd be shocked if that's on the moon right now. Oh my goodness.
So likely on Nibelung's orders, Dragonkind began working on space elevators and shuttles and satellites that could take them far beyond the stars. But around this time, for reasons that we're not aware of, Nibelung decided to leave his position and investigate something on his own. Just temporarily, he intended to come back, but he certainly couldn't leave the world unattended. Someone needed to govern the cycle of the world in his place, someone like a regent. So he created the 3 moons from the earth and set them aloft in the sky. These moons were governed by 3 sisters named Arya, Sonnet, and Canon, or alternatively, Arlos, Solnari, and Canon. This means we have actual confirmation that the moons and the 3 moon sisters that used to rule Teyvat were dragons, or at least draconic creations. And that means it's very likely that their subordinates, the Seelies, also known as angels, were also draconic. this is important information for later. So, while the Moon Sisters were in charge of the world, a reaver descended from beyond the sky, and with the assistance of 4 shades that they...
Oh my goodness gracious. She's using the Flame Reaver from Star Rail as her imagery. And you know what's so crazy? I didn't even think about that. This nigga Finon went by the name of Flame Reaver because he kept Wait a minute. Oh my goodness, this is a direct parallel. The Flame Reaver was out here snatching all these damn core flames to prevent the arrival of Era Nova. Because for those who know, you know. For those who don't, go play the quest. It's got a skip button, so you can go skip through it if you don't feel like, going through the story. But now I have to parallel it to Genshin. So the Reaver in this case, they don't have a title. I don't have a name before the word Reaver, so we can only call them a Reaver. So I mean, this Reaver came and snatched the authorities of the dragons, at least the sovereigns, clapped their dragon lord. Hold up, I'm gonna let her continue. So I'm just over here theorizing. Anyway, let's continue.
That they made of themselves, the Moon Sisters submitted to them and allowed the Reaver to seize Nibelung's throne and become what we know of as the Heavenly Principles. And then they terraformed the land and introduced a new species called humans to the world. Or as Wahaklahun Ubakan says, they just kind of tossed humans into Tibet. Dragonkind believed that the moon goddesses betrayed them, and although they never stopped struggling against the new world order established by the Heavenly Principles and enforced by the 4 Shades and the 3 Moons, they were unable to do anything without the help of their king. They waged a...
Okay. So from Ashikai's point of view, the Moon Sisters and the Shades are separate entities. Okay. And you know what? I think I may have to agree with that as well. Because even my theory about the Moon Sisters doesn't really fit when there's 3 moons and there's 4 shades.
A devastating war against heaven and lost. When Nibelung finally returned from whatever it was he thought he was supposed to be doing, he was furious to discover that his daughters apparently betrayed him and all of his kind. And he was even more upset about the existence of this Reaver that became the Heavenly Principles after stealing his throne. But he quickly came to the conclusion that the only way he was going to get his throne back was to retrieve forbidden knowledge from the abyss. So he left Teyvat once again. Now we're going to pause this history lesson for a second because this is the moment in history when visions first appeared on Teyvat.
Oh, really?
But they didn't appear as visions at first. They appeared as their precursor, the moon wheels. The information that we got from the Nodcry interlude quest took place during this point in the timeline where Nibelung disappeared to retrieve forbidden knowledge and the Moon Sisters started working for the Heavenly Principles. The 3 of them collaborated with their new master to develop crystalline ritual objects that they gifted to their human followers so that they could communicate with them directly. These crystals were called moon wheels and leveraged some purer form of power similar to phlogiston. Now I think this purer form of power refers to the power of wishes because a wish is what binds a moon wheel to its wielder. This is why moon wheels and visions appear before humans with powerful desires or ambitions. Those are considered wishes. Now, according to Natlan's 8th Dragon Lord, it's an Allegene's soul that's anchored to a moon wheel through a wish. And the...
Hold on, let me read this. Wait, hold up. Where did she find this text? Hold up, let me go back.
Powerful desires or ambitions. Those are considered wishes. Now, according to Natlan's 8th Dragon Lord, it's an Allegene's soul that's anchored to a moon wheel through a wish. And the combination of these 3 things allows an Allegene to manipulate elemental energy. So basically, a moon wheel is a foci.
Oh, this lore must be coming from Anefa's character story. That's where she got it from.
Soul that's anchored to a moon wheel through a wish. And the combination of these 3 things allows an Allegene to manipulate elemental energy. So basically, a moon wheel is a foci or medium through which one can use their soul to control elemental energy. The wish is something like a contract or a key that allows the interaction to take place. I find find this revelation to be particularly funny because in the Genshin comic, you're gonna notice that some of the close-up shots of visions don't have an elemental symbol in them. Instead, they have a star, and we often wish on stars, so stars represent wishes. And this comic came out way before the game did, so even back then, Hoyo knew exactly how they wanted visions to work. Now, I have been talking about moon wheels and visions as if they're interchangeable things, but it does seem like Hoyo wants to differentiate them a little bit. Drip marketing material for Nod Cry labeled characters like Lalma and Flynn's as possessing a moon wheel, while Aino has a regular vision. Now,
oh, hold on, let me look. Moon wheel, Dendro, moon wheel, Electro, Vision, Hydro. Oh, okay, so this must be this lunar blessing stuff. So there is a difference between visions and moon wheels, because the moon wheel gives a lunar blessing, which initiates these new type of elemental reactions, right? Which is why you got lunar bloom, lunar charge, right? But are the other elemental reactions still the same?
Now, I'm not 100% sure what the difference is between the two, and I'm sure they're gonna tell us when we get to Nod Cry, but if I had to take a guess, you know how visions require Archons to grant a fragment of their elemental authority to an Allogene? Well, I think the source of authority is where the difference between visions and moon wheels lie. Moon wheels likely contain lunar authority, while visions get authority from Archons. The people of Nod Cry worship a moon goddess of sorts, so it stands to reason that Columbina has been granting fragments of her lunar authority to the people there. This would imply that moons are omni-element though, as Archons grant authority fragments by element type and not by region, and what's going on in Nod Cry is that moon wheels are being granted by region and not really by element. I'm also not 100% sure on how or where the whole authority aspect of moon wheels and visions comes into play. So if this really does end up being the difference between a vision and a moon wheel, I'm sure we're gonna learn more about this particular mechanic once we get to Nod Cry. But for now, this is my best guess.
And something I want to say, I hope that they give the traveler the ability to use the lunar blessing thing. Cause it'd be such a lame thing if they decide, oh, we're going to withhold the traveler from being able to use it until, let's say, the end of Nod Cry's entire story quest, right? Because we know that whole story is going to last an entire year, just like how Amphorius is, right? I just hope that we are not about to sit here and do this crap where we're going to be like, oh, you won't get Lunar Traveler until the end of the year. Because it'll be so corny. Why, if they decide to do that? And if they do decide to do that, it'd be like, why did you withhold a free character option that has the Lunar Blessing effect? Which then you can throw that character on to a Nod Cry team of characters. Why? Right? I just hope they don't do that. And I hope they give the traveler this ability. It'll really suck if they don't do it to him.
And I feel pretty okay about it given that the reactions you get from Nod Cry characters are lunar reactions, and not just regular elemental reactions. And with that, we now know how visions work and where they came from. Those are two really big mysteries that are almost completely solved. But we can't go back to our history lesson just yet, because the term moon wheel isn't just a name for proto-visions, it's also a name for the moons themselves. And to explain why that matters, I need you to follow me into speculative territory for a little bit.
Okay.
And then we can go back to the history lesson. Okay, so according to multiple sources, including the Song of the Welkin Moon preview trailers and web event, the Moon Sisters were responsible for, quote, weaving the threads of fate, which backs up the popular theory that the Moon Sisters are indeed entities comparable to the Norse Norns or the Greek Morai, especially since both groups of sisters were known for weaving the threads of fate. For the Morai, it was more like they were spinning the threads of fate on a spinning wheel, while the Norns wove a web of fate from the threads representing human lives. But spinning and weaving are disciplines that go hand in hand, so blending these two concepts just makes sense. I actually wrote a whole theory about this that's aged exceptionally well, so if you want more details about how all this spinning and weaving and fate stuff, you can check it out. But
I watched that video already a couple years back.
remember, Nibelung created the moons to govern the cycles of the world in his place. That way he could go off and do other things. But if the moons are supposed to be governing the cycles of the world in Nibelung's place, but they also are responsible for weaving the threads of fate, then that suggests that the whole weaving the threads of fate thing was originally Nibelung's power. Fate should have been Nibelung's original authority. Now, according to Fractured Halo, the heavenly principles gained possession of the vows upon which the three caused the world to turn.
Hold on. The river from beyond the skies replaced the primordial creator and gained possession of the vows upon which the three caused the world to turn. Okay. So, my theory was right. So, now, granted, now it's like, okay, so did they bend the knee to the usurper because the usurper threatened them? Or did they bend the knee to the usurper because the usurper gave them a reason that's, like, not threatening to bend the knee to them? I need to know that reasoning.
These should be the three Moon Sisters. So the Heavenly Principles somehow convinced the Moon Sisters to swear allegiance to them, which is how they got control over this new order of fate that they've imposed over Teyvat, and it's also the reason why the dragons call their own goddesses traitors. They handed over the original Dragon King's power to this new stranger. And on top of all that, when Nouvelette's character story says that the Heavenly Principles had their functions ruined and could no longer use their absolute authority to suppress the original order of the world, he may be describing this incident where the moons were shattered during the Great War of Vengeance. Because if the Heavenly Principles loses access to the power of the moons, then they lose access to the power of fate directly.
And then, because she's probably about to say it next, then this brings Irminsul into play. Because if the moons were the thing that governed fate originally, in a more, let's say, natural sense, right? Or on a cosmic level, right? That means once those were destroyed, they had to create a new system to govern fate, which is why they created Irminsul and the false sky. Boom shakalaka. Let's continue.
And the timeline we have supports this conclusion. So before we continue this train of thought, let's finish our little history lesson. After the Heavenly Principles conquered dragonkind, gained the vows of the moons, established human civilization, and enslaved the Seelie/Angel race, the Voyager returned to Teyvat. But Nibelung was nowhere to be found because he had left to find forbidden knowledge so he could defeat the Heavenly Principles and, reclaim his throne. Confused as to her friend's absence, the Voyager possessed the body of a young man, and through a funny series of events, they met the first angel who was imprisoned underground. The first angel fell in love with the Voyager in a human shell, and after sharing their grievances over Teyvat's new bullshit government, they decided to rebel against the Heavenly Principles. And the moons both witnessed and apparently quietly approved of this plan, which does suggest that the moons were either coerced into serving the Heavenly Principles or had regrets over the contract that they signed. Now, this is where things get a little murky because a lot of stuff happens during this aptly named funerary year. Just so we don't get confused, I'm gonna tell you what we know for sure happened first, and then I'm gonna tell you my interpretation. So just stick with me here. The funerary year starts with the Voyager and the first angel inciting the Angel Rebellion against the Heavenly Principles. At some point during this rebellion, the second throne of heaven arrives and the rebellion turns into a war. Nibelung also returns around this time, bringing the Abyss and forbidden knowledge into Teyvat, which is...
Okay. Then we got to assume the second throne that came had to been the second who came, which would have to be the individual. Honestly, I think there's a second individual working alongside the first usurper as like a two-man mission. The usurper is, of course, higher position than the usurper's right-hand man. Then you have the shades underneath them, and then the rest of the totem pole goes.
Which inspires the remaining dragon sovereigns to rejoin the war to get their revenge against the usurper. This is how it got named the Great War of Vengeance. It got the funerary year name because a lot of stuff died. But the angels' rebellion failed. The Heavenly Principles unleashed the celestial nails, which rendered the angels into formless Seelies and mended the land that was corrupted by the abyss that Nibelung brought with him. Both the Voyager and the first angel were punished for their actions. They were separated from each other and stripped of their memories. Nibelung also allegedly died around this time, and at some point towards the end of this war, the moons shattered and the Heavenly Principles created the Gnosis and automated vision distribution system with the help of, the one who came after. We don't know who the one who came after is, although there's a lot of speculation that we'll talk about in a second, but that actually brings us right up to the start of the Archon War, which we're not going to go into because it's not really relevant. Now, once again, this is everything that we know for sure happened. the facts as we have them.
Yep.
So now I'm going to tell you what I think actually went down based on these facts.
All right, hit me with it.
The funerary year definitely starts with the Voyager and the first angel inciting the angel rebellion against the heavenly principles. This is very, very similar to how Lucifer led the angels in the War of Heaven found in the Bible. In this case, Lucifer should be the Voyager, as both are referred to as stars in one capacity or another. Now, because I'm thinking of Voyager as a Lucifer archetype, I also think Voyager is the so-called second throne of heaven because Lucifer was trying to be the second throne of heaven, the heir of God. It's very simple logic, yes, but stick with me. I
don't know about Lucifer trying to be the second throne of heaven. More like he was trying to be the throne of heaven by kicking God out of his seat. I feel like that's more accurate. That's a more accurate, line to say. But anyway, we're going to let her keep cooking, right? That's a little small tidbit.
The angel rebellion failed fairly quickly into the funeral.
Let me
The
rewind.
logic of heaven because Lucifer was trying to be the second throne of heaven, the heir of God. It's very simple logic, yes, but stick with me. I think the angel rebellion failed fairly quickly into the funerary year because the moons witnessed the heavenly principles stripping both the Voyager and the first angel of their memories and separating them, which means that this failure has to come before Nibelung arrives with the Abyss, because it's only upon his arrival that the moons are shattered. So the angel rebellion fails, and then Nibelung returns to shatter the moons, and the remaining dragon sovereigns join in, seeking to eke out revenge against the heavenly.
And more than likely, Nibelung shattered the moons because he probably was pissed at them for what they did while he was gone. Right? He was like, since y'all betrayed me, death is your reward, and then claps them.
Principles. That's the end of the Angel Rebellion and the beginning of the Great War of Vengeance. I think the two kind of blend together a little bit, but I do believe that they're two separate incidents. Now, I also think that the devastation brought by the Abyss corrupted Nibelung was so great that the Heavenly Principles was forced to cast down the Celestial Nails. These nails purified the abyssal energy, destroyed the bodies of the rebellious angels as a side effect and also maybe as punishment, and likely killed Nibelung directly. Whatever angels survived the onslaught, like Nabu Malikata, were exiled from heaven and wandered the land. Now, at the end of all this chaos, the Heavenly Principles and the, quote, one who came after created the seven Gnosis together, and that is a pretty important event, but we're gonna come back to this because there's a more important event that's flying under the radar here. Based on the story in Moonpiercer, when the moons were shattered, the dust eventually fell to Earth and settled within the hearts of humans. To quote Moonpiercer, those who breathe in the dust of the moons will have a pearl-like moon in their hearts. And I've taken this to mean that because the moons shattered, the big moon wheels fragmented and became little moon wheels that grow inside of the hearts of people. Because as we talked about earlier, the moon wheels were originally given by the moons to their followers, and if the dust of the moons can coagulate inside of a person and form a proper moon wheel, then we can assume that the moon wheels are, at their core, literal fragments of the moons themselves. So in theory...
So essentially, niggas was back when the moon, shattered and whatnot. They was smoking that crazy stuff. That's what it was. That's what that is, right? They was smoking that crazy stuff, that Frit Breeze stuff, that legal stuff, if you would, that crystal bath, that crystal stuff. They was sniffing it up, smoking unintentionally, mind you, because oh my God, the moon shattered. It blew up. The dust falls to the earth. Niggas unintentionally smoke this stuff up, sniff it up. Oh man, what's that stuff? Smells good. Basically. And then this stuff builds up in their chest. Well, more so not their chest, probably their soul rather, right? Because visions just be manifesting out of nowhere, right? Because niggas be like, where do visions even come from? And now this kind of answers the question. The vision is already in the person's soul. It just, now it, pops out and manifests right here in front of you, right? Or if you find a vision, that's empty, then that thing will glow up, right?
If someone were to come to possess a fragment of the moon itself, then they may be able to tap into that, quote, purer form of power that moon wheels and visions are based on. Not necessarily lunar authority exactly, because they're not really around anymore, but a fragment of the ability once thought to be exclusive to the moons, the power to weave fate. Which means that those who possess a moon wheel, also known as a vision, possess a fragment of the moon wheel of fate. And the reason I'm very confident about this interpretation is because the relevant mythology that Hoyo appears to be referencing supports this idea. Since we know that the moons were dragons or draconic in nature, the little crystalline pearls gifted to humans that allow them to use draconic power should, by definition, be considered dragon pearls. I've made a whole video about how visions are dragon pearls, so if you want a more robust argument aside from this moon stuff, you can check that out. Now, in Chinese mythology, dragons generally possess a flaming pearl that contains their knowledge and power and wisdom. Now, phlogiston is a flaming substance that contains both knowledge and power, and it was the basis for the development of the elemental system that visions or moon wheels manipulate. So thinking of visions as flaming dragon pearls is reasonable, I think. Now, it's important to note that these flaming pearls are also called wish-granting pearls, or mani gems in dharmic religions like Buddhism and Hinduism, because they grant wishes. And I don't know about you, but that kind of sounds like how a vision leverages a powerful wish to manipulate the elemental powers of the world. In fact, both visions and mani gems can purify tainted water, which in Genshin's case is...
My bad, I didn't say this. This is unrelated to the theory video at hand. But I remember the content creator named Kika. They made a comparison video, and it was showing off what I think it had something to do with the whole black screen white text bullcrap, or if it had to be like, oh, look how they show this scene by making it more dynamic by having this character put their hand up and like mist energies in their hand, right? In the case of KallaTheYapper, back in like the Septimon story, right? And I'm sitting thinking to myself, bro, why are we acting like this same shit didn't happen in Genshin Impact? And you seeing the scene right here in front of you, right? And this has happened multiple times. It's like, come on, bro. But anyway, we ain't here to talk about comparisons. Let's get back to the video.
Is probably the abyss, because it's usually referred to in terms of water, like when it's called the black tide. Granted, vision wielders don't so much purify the abyss as much as they repel it, but it's close enough for our purposes. Now, mani gems were also considered to be one of the 7 treasures of the...
My bad, I gotta pause it. My girl Cypher, she got done dirty by that nigga Finon, or should I call him Flame Reaver? He did her so dirty. My girl deserved better.
Chakravarti, or wheel-turning king, who in this case should be Nibelung because he was the one who originally had the power over the Wheel of Fate that he then passed down to his lunar daughters. And the wheel that a Chakravarti turns is called the Wheel of Dharma, which you can think of as the wheel of the world's fate. That's not a totally accurate comparison because such a powerful religious symbol comes with a lot of nuances, but it'll do for now. Interestingly, this wheel is considered to be both the wheel of the Chakravarti solar chariot, as it is akin to a sun disk, as well as an eye that lights up and witnesses the world. And this reminds me a lot of Shmiquaddle's golden entreaties because he was a fire dragon who forged the golden entreaties from his own eye. And the entreaties were not just the control hub for Huitzilopochtli, but according to Kukulkan, they were also a means to monitor and anchor reality. Now then,
I just been reminded I need to add those. Hopefully I added those streams when I played those Natland Dragon World quests to a playlist, because I want to go back and screen record some of that stuff for a video.
The Wheel of Dharma is also considered to be one of the main symbols of Vishnu, who, as part of the Trimurti, is considered to be one of the 3 facets of a singular supreme being, the other 2 facets being Brahma and Shiva. Collectively, they're called Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, but I'm gonna just call them Nibelung. Now, if you look at the center of the Wheel of Dharma, you're gonna notice a somewhat familiar symbol, like a yin-yang with 3 spinny bits instead of 2. This symbol is called a Gankyle, and it has a lot of associations and meanings that you can look up on your own, but for today,
the only time I've ever seen a symbol like that is with the Sharingan. Boom! Anybody who watch Naruto know what I'm talking about. Anyway, let's continue.
Really concerned with the Genkyle's interpretation of the triple-eyed wish-granting gem of the Chakravarti. So a wish-granting gem of fate that's associated with eyes sounds a lot like a vision or a moon wheel, which means that we could interpret this as suggesting that Tevat's moons were technically massive visions, like the Mani gems that were at the center of Nibelung's giant cosmic Dharma wheel. And I find this association super funny because in the Nordic traditions, Mani is actually the name of the moon god, just straight up. I'm only really mentioning that because Nibelung's name comes from Germanic myths rather than, Greek or Hindu. But Hoyo really likes their mythology smoothie, so. Anyway, the moons being the Gankyle of the Dharmic wheel, which is typically typically seen as the wheel of the solar chariot, is probably the reason why some legends in Teyvat also talk about a lunar chariot instead of a solar one. At some point, that solar chariot wheel of Dharma was given to the moons at the center and became the lunar chariot. So whenever we see a reference to the lunar chariot of Teyvat being overturned, what we're actually witnessing is a story about the wheel of fate being overturned when the moons were shattered. Now, I'm not changing the subject, I promise, but you know how I pitched the idea that the second throne, who is also probably the second descender, might be the Voyager? Well, technically speaking, the Voyager was the second to arrive into that from beyond the sky, with the Heavenly Principles, or the
That is true.
Reaver being the first. Technically speaking, Nibelung was the third to arrive after his initial departure, which means that it's very likely that Nibelung was the third descender, despite being a dragon that was actually born alongside the world itself. And
that is true, because the stipulation that makes one a descender is not even about whether or not if you don't come from this planet or not. The stipulation that makes one a descender is, do you possess the ability to manipulate fate? Essentially, basically, right? And Nibelung was a being born from the natural power of Teyvat when this planet, first came into existence. So by default, he had this ability, and then he gave it over to the Moon Sisters, and then the Moon Sisters gave it to the Usurper. Ain't that some? Could you imagine being born with such great power, only for a nigga to be like, "Oh, yo, boss, we gave it to someone else." You'd be livid. What? You gave my fate bending ability to some rando who came? Why?
and being the original ruler of the world. Now, Nibelung as the third descender was a very popular theory that I was skeptical of for a very long time, but I am on board with it now, not just because of this order of operations thing, but because the Voyager was the first to warn Nibelung about the Abyss's existence and how it could threaten the world itself. So the Voyager is likely somewhat anti-Abyss, or they at least believe it to be a power that's too great for anyone to control or oppose. So my hypothesis is that the Voyager and the Heavenly Principles worked together to divvy up Nibelung's remains into the 7 Gnosis, because Nibelung had been corrupted by the Abyss and could no longer be trusted with the fate of the world. And we know that the Gnosis were made...
Ooh, before she continue, okay, I just had to decide. So, if the Usurper and the Moon Sisters, or in particular just the Usurper themselves, played a role in erasing the memory of both that angel and the Voyager, this would mean that the Usurper kept the Voyager around despite the fact that they erased their memories. So essentially, they would have created a subservient individual by lying and manipulating them, being like, yo, you're my right-hand man, I need your help with this. And be like, oh, okay, sure, I'll help you. You see that that dead dragon corpse? Yeah, we're gonna split that up into 7 pieces to create these things I have an idea for called Gnosis, right? Now, what I just pitched feels like the most reasonable thing that could have happened, right? It just sounds like it makes sense, right? You erase someone's memory and they don't know who the F they are after you erase their memory. Boom. That just naturally happens, right? You can just naturally lie to them and be like, oh, you my right-hand guy. Don't worry, come on, follow me, right? Shoot. I watched that whole anime that had a whole plot similar to that. Or a part of their plot similar to that. If you've seen Redo of Shield Hero, or is it called? No, Redo of Healer. That's what it's called. Redo of Healer. For anyone who knows about this notorious anime, you know how the main character is moving. And it's similar to how the Usurper is moving in context to this timeline she's put together. Now, let's continue.
Aid from the remains of the third descender, which means that the only one who could come later to help the first descender, aka the Heavenly Principles, make the Gnosis, should have been the second descender, right? And the Voyager seems like a very good candidate for that, especially if they don't remember the first angel, and because they've traveled the cosmos for millennia. They probably know all sorts of really neat tricks about how the universe works, and maybe that includes how to divvy up pieces of dragon power. Now, we've talked a lot in the past about how the Gnosis are chess piece.
See, she even came to that conclusion just as much as I did. It's just a natural conclusion to come to, right? You erase someone's memories, lie to them, boom.
and we've debated at length which piece is which gnosis, or if all the gnosis are kings and whatnot, but I want to ignore the whole chess piece thing for a second and pitch an entirely new idea.
Okay.
What if the gnosis are actually the spokes of the Wheel of Dharma, and they were extracted from Nibelung and distributed to the archons who play their role in helping maintain the Wheel of Fate? So if we think of the gnosis as spokes of the Wheel of Dharma, then the archons are sort of like stabilizing this wheel and allowing it to spin around its axis, and what's left of the Mani gems inside of humankind might be serving as the axis of the wheel. Or rather, all of these little Mani gems might be bound to the placeholder axis of the wheel, which in this case would be Irminsul, because...
Okay, so me and her came to sort of the same conclusion. It just we went two different pathways getting there. Granted, I didn't go in depth about the vision thing, like the way she did. Okay, let's continue.
Irminsul should be the axis mundi, or the axis of the world. And since Mani gems are related to souls, and Irminsul is basically a repository of all the souls, and it also connects everyone together through the ley lines, I think this idea checks out. If I'm right about that interpretation, then I think I understand what the Heavenly Principles has been trying to do with this whole vision system thing. See, if we assume that Nibelung is the triple Vishnu who possessed the Wheel of Fate, or Dharma, and his daughters were the triple Mani gems at the wheel's center, then perhaps the Heavenly Principles is Indra. Indra is a Hindu sky god, the king of the Devas, and the god of order who destroys evil. He's a very important deity, but he's not an almighty creator god, and that's kind of the point. Because neither is the Heavenly Principles. So the reason I'm talking about Indra is because there is a tale where the Mani gem belongs to Indra, or at least Indra came into possession of the Mani gems. And that's very reminiscent of how the moons pledged allegiance to the Heavenly Principles, providing that the moons are the Mani gems. Now in this tale, the Mani gem actually fell to Earth during a war with the Asuras, and that allowed anyone who possessed it to grant their own wishes. And that sounds a lot like how the moons fell and settled within the hearts of humans, becoming wish-fulfilling visions. Now here's the other thing. A war with the Asuras is actually referenced directly in Genshin. It's in the book Legend of the Shattered Halberd. This is actually a super important series of books that we don't really have time to go into right now, but basically this series is suggesting that the war between the Heavenly Principles and the dragons is the same one as the one between this Celestial Emperor and the Asuras, which should be the same war as the one between Indra and the Asuras, which means that the Asuras are dragons, and the Legend of the Shattered Halberd must be alluding to an allegorical battle between Nibelung and the Heavenly Principles. Hey, future Ashikai here.
Oh, damn.
Earlier in this theory, I suggested that Nibelung destroyed the moons in a fit of rage upon his return, but I need to add a couple of caveats to that. Would have added the caveats in earlier, but I only came to this conclusion because of the Legend of the Shattered Halberd stuff. Also, sorry for pronouncing Shattered Halberd wrong. The dyslexia got me this time. Anyway, according to Mitternach's Waltz, 2 moons were destroyed specifically by a, quote, sword that tore heaven asunder. Legend of the Shattered Halberd and Mitternach's Waltz are both connected to Fischl's stories, which is why I'm kind of...
Wait, is this Fischl's bow? No way Fischl has a canonic best in slot bow for herself. If she does, I'd be shocked. Genuinely. Hold on, let me read this myself. 2 of the 3 bright moons that cause that perfume to sea of the primordial universe to shine and stir up the beasts of the Arianahood realm were shredded by a sword that tore the horizon asunder, left in smithereens, too small even for the majestic light sight of the even for the majestic sight of the princessen. Good lord, I can't speak. My apologies.
I'm kind of lumping them in together. So if we continue with the assumption that the Legend of the Shattered Halberd is describing, allegorically at least, a battle between the returned abyss-afflicted Nibelung and the Heavenly Principles, then Mitternach's Waltz's description of the thing that destroyed the moons as a sword becomes quite interesting, because the Divine Halberd was shattered into a bunch of different swords. So I do think the Divine Halberd and the sword from Mitternach's Waltz are the same thing, especially since they were both considered weapons to be used against the divine. However, the description of the Nilapala Lotus says that it was an arrow that shot down the moons. And based on that description, it feels quite possible that the moons were actually shattered by the celestial nails that were allegedly launched by the Heavenly Principles. Although that does feel really weird without any supporting context, because the Heavenly Principles controlled the moons, so there was no real need for them to destroy the moons. And based on...
Unless the Moon Sisters attempted to betray the usurper, right? Because like, let's say they bent the knee to the usurper when they arrived because they knew they couldn't challenge his power, or they fought against him, got slapped to the floor, was told bend the knee. They bent the knee, handed over the power of authority over the governing of this planet, right? Let's say when the funerary year, right, where the moons fell and the war of vengeance happens, right? Let's say the Moon Sisters were like, yo, we gotta get back this authority from him. We should have never given it up to him to begin with, even though we bent the knee because he beat us, but we got to get it back. Then, in their attempt to get it back, the usurper is like, all this havoc is going on this planet and whatnot. The abyss is pouring in from different spots. I got to use the nails. They're trying to take this from me while I'm in the midst of doing this. I start shooting nails everywhere. The moons, got to clap them first before I handle the land first. Boom, boom, 2 nails to the moons. Bam, bam, destroys both of them. Only 1 moon remains. Then starts throwing nails downstairs to the planet. Bam, bam, boom, bam, right? And then boom, solves the problem. But in the process of solving this problem, kind of destroyed the system that gave him the ability to govern fate. So now he has to create a new system, which has to be, the Gnosis, Leyline system, Ermin Soul, Fall Sky. Bam. There we go. At least that's my theory.
Based on Nouvelette's character stories, it sounds more like the Heavenly Principles had their functions ruined rather than ruined their own functions. And if we assume the moons are their functions, then, that doesn't quite make much sense. But I want to point out that it's quite interesting that this weapon can be called a halberd, a bow and arrow, or a sword. Because
I think the only reason why it can be called that is because the weapon in question has to be like, the only way that makes sense to me is that it has to be in the shape of this, like a javelin, right? Let's think about it. Let's think about a long javelin, right? If you break up the javelin into pieces, or at least the area where the blade of the javelin is at, right? If you break it into pieces, the damn thing starts becoming a sword or a halberd or whatever, right? There's this big weapon or this long, lengthy weapon, right, that have all this power. You can keep shattering it and breaking it into pieces until it becomes like a sword, technically, right?
Because the flexibility in terms of how this weapon can be described makes it feel like it might be more representative of the will of Nibelung himself, and that this will was later split into the Gnosis the same way the Divine Halberd was split into multiple swords in the
Oh, okay, I see where she's going. Never mind. Forget what I was talking about.
novel. This theory is made possible thanks to the Nartzenkreuz quest, which established the existence of the Sword of Reason, which represented a descender's world-shaping will, and that will could take on any shape, not just the shape of a sword.
True.
Anyway, I felt like I had to acknowledge that, mostly because Anilat Palalota's description says that the arrow that apparently shattered the moons actually shot the gems off the wheels of the lunar chariot, which sounds a lot like the Gankil/Mani gems that adorned the Wheel of Dharma, which was also the wheel of a solar and lunar chariot, as we established earlier. I'm currently working on a theory about Fischl and noticed this just before it went live, so I thought I'd just toss it in. Anyway, that's all I had to add. Back to past me. So just like Indra lost the Mani gems to humans during a war with the Ashuras, the Heavenly Principles lost the moons to humans during the Great War of Vengeance. And without the 3 moons to make up the axle of the fate wheel of Dharma, the Heavenly Principles wove a net. Indra's net. Actually, Indra's net is a massive net that envelops the world wherein a gem is placed wherever the net's threads intersect. This creates a sort of web of fate. Incidentally, Indra's net hangs over Mount Meru, which in Genshin should be in Sumeru, which is also where Irminsul is. Irminsul is effectively the axis of the world, not too dissimilar to the axle of a wheel, and its roots make a giant web or net known as the ley lines, which are reflected by the stars in the sky. All allogenes have a constellation reflected in these stars, so every vision is directly connected to that web of stars in the sky. What I find most fascinating about this comparison is how Malwika's backup plan to save Natlan from the Abyss was to pull all souls out of the ley lines to form a giant soul net barrier. If visions are powered by souls, then is the world not already protected by Indra's soul net? So with Irminsul as the axle and the Gnosis as the spokes, the wheel of fate continues to turn, and the world receives some level of protection from the abyss. This is the Heavenly Principles' backup plan to shelter the world without the power of fate in their hands. And yet, I feel like the reason why people are encouraged to manifest their visions is so that the Heavenly Principles can harvest them upon their deaths. Removing the moon in their heart in order to reconstruct the moons themselves could be the end goal here. That could be why Archons are required to share a fragment of their authority when...
And that would feel like it... Hold up. And that's why it would make sense why it is that in the Genshin manga, right, Vanessa, the legendary knight of Mondstadt, right, that we heard so much about, right, it would make sense that when she ascended to Celestia, she saw a room where it looks like there was a bunch of cages everywhere, like it was a prison, and she looked upon it in shock before she had this face of acceptance, before she like would turn away and leave and take the form of a falcon, right? Because the usurper is harvesting all these souls that have these moon fragments in them, which in case have the visions, which allows for all these niggas to ascend to Celestia, which then they harvest to, you know, use their power, which makes sense, right? It makes sense with the whole false sky, the fate of like Irminsul and all this other stuff. It just makes sense. It's all designed this way just so they can keep the system running. Because if the humans don't exist with this moon stuff, the system as a whole fails. Because the moons have already been destroyed.
When visions manifest, they need to keep the system going, and the people need to believe that visions are a divine blessing and not something that belongs to an individual. Because if you think about it, to possess a vision is to possess a fragment of the moon's power over fate. If the moons can control the fate of the whole world with 3 giant moon wheels, then perhaps an individual actually possesses the ability to control their own personal fate with a tiny fragment of the moon. Which also means that visions are tiny individual looms of fate, and I think that's pretty cool. I'm expecting a lot more vision lore coming up in the next region, and I'm especially interested in learning more about delusions, because there's supposed to be artificially created visions that likely possess authorities of other dead non-Archon or moon gods.
Okay.
And I'm curious to see if they still have that same moon base, like
I'm gonna wait until she finishes.
or if they're made from like recovered moon wheels, or if the Fatui have figured out some aspects of the dragon's moon forging or lunar reconstruction technology with which to create their own moon wheels. Kind of leaning towards that last one, because as a moon maiden herself and a member of the Fatui, Columbina might provide a very valuable research vector for them, so it's definitely possible that they're just kind of making their own. But that does mark the end of the video for now. I've been a bit slower than usual thanks to real-world obligations this past month, but I am back in the saddle with a whole new list of topics to cover, and I am very excited to share them with you guys. So that's something to look forward to, but that's also for later. So for now, thank you all so much for watching, and a double thank you to my members. You are the extra cream in my supersized Oreos. Your support confuses me, but I do appreciate it nonetheless. I am off to investigate more mysteries, so until next time, make sure to stay happy, hydrated, and I guess I'll try to do the same. No promises. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Alright. Granted, I don't know why the video's still going. Unless you got like something else you need to add. Okay, apparently not. So I'm gonna pause it. I'm gonna give the video a like, naturally, because I love to support her videos and all this stuff. Granted, I don't know how long I've been reacting to this video for, so I'll see after I end the reaction. But yeah, this was a good video. This was a good theory video. I really liked it. There's something else I was gonna say related to this whole moon stuff. Oh, I was gonna say, okay, so what brings the Traveler into this, right? Because the Shade of Space refused to let the traveling twins leave 500 years ago. So I would have to assume, okay, so what role does the Traveler play in this whole, you know, keeping the system running type ish? Because the Traveler is supposed to be the one to ascend to this throne of God and take the position from the usurper and become the new one that, you know, runs the system, right? And you know what? It even makes more sense why the Traveler is going to be the one to take that position, right? Because we've seen it. Right? We've seen the Traveler take upon the wishes of the people or be imbued by the power of others in order to get the job done. From defeating Osial to, fighting Raiden to like abolish the Vision Hunt decree. Like, we've seen this. And if this moon theory is correct with this whole the fragment of the moons, at least the energy of it, seeping into humans, which then results in the creation of visions, right? Then it's like, okay, the traveler has made so many friends across multiple nations that possess visions. And if his connection to them allows for him to ascend to the role of God, which is what the usurper is in this position, right? And be the one to reweave the fate of the world, then the traveler's got it in the bag. So now it makes me wonder, why did the Lord of Space keep them here? Did the Lord of Space keep the traveling twins here on this planet so that they could save the usurper? So that they can take the usurper's position? What was the reasoning other than, oh, you arrogant humans, we're ending this arrogance now type ish? Because there has to be more to it. Why would you keep someone who obviously is an objective threat to your king and to the system that they created? Why would you keep them on this planet instead of just letting them leave? Unless the usurper fears something that exists out in the depths of space, which is why they came here, right? I'm just going on a rant, but you get the picture I'm painting for you, right? I gotta know there's gotta be a deeper reasoning for why the Lord of Space kept the twins here. There's gotta be a deeper reasoning. Hopefully I presented the deeper reasoning with my thoughts here. But anyway, yeah, that's it. I ain't gonna say no more. I'm gonna say it again, like I said in the beginning of the video. Like the video, sub to the channel, turn the notification bell on when I stream. Join the Discord if you want to, so you'll know when I stream, and like just chat it up with some of the people in the Discord. It's not as active, but like it is what it is, twin. Yeah. See you later. Good night. Oh, I'm gonna leave a link to Ashikai's video in the description, so you can go watch it yourself and get a like and a sub and all that other good dandy stuff. And I'll see y'all later. Peace. Good night.